So, hello then, welcome back to yet another Night of the Movies podcast. I'm Spike Knight, and in these podcasts I like talking all things movies and TV, and whatever I want, whenever I want. And in today's podcast, I'm reviewing The Iron Claw. But just before I do that, I should say what I say at the start of every podcast I do, which is, if you are watching this podcast on YouTube, hello to my viewers, but prefer to listen to your podcast on Spotify, well, you can look, as you can also listen to this podcast on Spotify at Night of the Movies on that platform. And if you are already listening to this podcast on Spotify, hello there to podcast listeners, then you can also check this podcast out visually. Yes, you can watch this podcast on my YouTube channel at Night of the Movies on that platform as well. Likewise, wherever you may be watching or listening to this podcast, don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy the podcast, of course. And please leave me with some feedback on things to improve on in future podcasts, because there are always things to improve on, and feedback is, as ever, much appreciated. So, let's get into it, shall we? The Iron Claw. So this film is written and directed by Sean Durkin and stars the likes of Zac Efron, Lily James, Jeremy Allen White, who's now been launched into the stratosphere because of his lead role in The Bear, one of my favourite TV shows in recent years, Harris Dickinson, Sandy Simmons, and plenty of other people. And I should say, this film is all about wrestling, and I know virtually nothing about wrestling at all. I have zero interest in wrestling, and I didn't know anything about the Von Erich family before watching this film, and that's what the film is all about. It's about the tragedy of the Von Erich family, but I didn't know anything about the family, because I didn't know anything about wrestling. So the reason I went to go and see this movie was because of the trailer. I really liked the trailers for this film because I kept seeing them every time I went to the cinema recently, and they would always catch me off guard. I'd go, yeah, okay, this is a trailer for a film about a wrestling family. Why should I care about them? By the end of the trailer, I'm like, okay, when does that come out? You know, I want to book my seats now, and that's exactly what I did. The other day, I went to go and see this film at the cinema, and the Google plot synopsis of the film goes as follows. This film follows the true story of the Von Erich brothers, who make history in the intensely competitive world of professional wrestling in the early 1980s. Through tragedy and triumph, the brothers seek larger-than-life immortality on the biggest stage in sport. And honestly, I loved this film. I found it a very emotionally impactful watch. And again, as I've already just said, I am not a wrestling fan whatsoever. So the fact that I like this movie, the fact that I love this movie, tells you how good it is, because I was watching the first half an hour of the film, and I wasn't sure whether I liked it or not. I was watching the first half, and I was thinking, okay, this is good, I get what it's going for, but I'm not sure if it's working for me. Then, somehow, it got to a point, and I realised that I was emotionally attached to the story and to the characters, and I was being broken. My heart was being broken by what was taking place in the film. It was truly an emotional roller coaster of so many emotions, because it is a heartbreaking watch. It is a shocking watch. And I also found it fascinating. From someone who doesn't know about wrestling at all, I found all of this story fascinating because I didn't know about the tragedy of the Von Erich family. So I'm watching this and I find it fascinating, as I've already said quite a few times. And at the same time, I found the end inspiring. Which, if you ask me, if I was going to find the end inspiring halfway through my viewing of this movie, I would have laughed in your face. But the way the film ends almost had me in tears. And when you find out what happened after the events of the film, I was like, wow, that's pretty inspirational, you know? It's really a brilliant film, and I'm surprised it's not been getting that much Academy Award love. You know, I'm really surprised about that, because I would have thought this was straight up the sort of, you know, alley that Academy Award voters would like to visit, if you follow my thinking. I would have thought this is exactly the sort of film that the Academy Awards would eat up, but apparently not. And I'm really shocked by that, because Zac Efron, I do think, was at least deserved of a Oscar nomination for this film. I mean, I'm not a big fan of Zac Efron, really. I haven't really seen him in much that he caught my eye in. I mean, I kind of liked him in The Great Showman, but other than that, I can't think of anything else I've thought that Zac Efron was actually really good in. He is very, very good in this film, and I never felt like I was watching Zac Efron. I never felt like I was watching him. Even so, at times, you know, you can tell it's Zac Efron playing this character because he does look a bit like Zac Efron. He just, you know, blended into that role. He fully immersed himself into that role, and I felt like I was watching this real family, even though you got the likes of Jeremy Allen White as one of the Von Erich brothers, and he, as I've already said, has been launched into the stratosphere now because of his role in The Bear, which he's been winning Emmys and Golden Globes for, and I'm watching him in this, and I don't feel like I'm watching Jeremy Allen White. I will say Jeremy Allen White was my least favourite performance in the film, because it felt like he was a little typecast after The Bear, because he plays a similar sort of character in this film as he does in The Bear. He shouts quite a lot and has, you know, little emotional and little subtle moments, but at the same time, though, I did think he was very good in it, and I didn't feel like I was watching Jeremy Allen White. He threw himself into that character. Same with Harris Dickinson, who has seemed to be seen in a lot more recently. Like, you know, he was in The King's Man, he was in Where the Crawdads Sing, and now he's in this, and he's really shown his versatility as an actor. And one of the ones which really caught off, which really surprised me in terms of performance, was Stanley Simmons. He gives a very compelling performance that really catches you off guard. And Maura Tierney and Hope McCarley, apologies if I'm mispronouncing those names, and I'm pretty sure I am, they give very good performances as the parents in this family. I mean, the whole film is very believable, and it feels like a horror movie. In fact, I would argue it is a horror movie, because you feel scared for, you know, you feel scared for these main group of characters. You want them to get away from this, like, haunted house they live in. It's not a haunted house, but you want them to get away from this horror that they are living in and go and live their own lives, but they are trapped under this house that their parents own and keep them in. And it's a horror movie. You want these characters to get away from it all, but you know deep down that some of them just aren't going to get away from it. And it is a horror movie. You feel scared for the characters, and you feel emotionally aligned with these characters as you do with the best horror movies. This is an add-on. One thing I wanted to say, but I just forgot to mention whilst actually recording this podcast, so this is me from beyond the recording of this podcast, is this. The film really makes you hate the father of the Von Erich family. Again, I know nothing about the Von Erich family, so maybe he wasn't as bad as he is portrayed in this film, but he's portrayed in such an horrific light that you really, and I mean really, come to hate him by the end of the film. Yeah, it's a hard film to watch, and I really think a lot of that is down to him. And I think Holt McClarney, again, apologies for mispronouncing the name, the way he plays the father of the Von Erich family makes you hate him even more. Yeah, the film is a hard watch, and that's another reason I think it is a horror movie. I do think it is scary, and it makes you feel unsettled, and it makes you feel uneasy, as the best horror movies do. You know, there's no jump scares in this film or anything like that. Don't go into this film thinking you're going to experience something like, I don't know, Friday the 13th. But at the same time, as the best horror movies do, it makes you feel unsettled, and it makes you feel uneasy, and that's another reason I think it's a horror movie. And I think that's a lot of that is down to the way the film portrays the father of the Von Erich family. Man, he is a nasty piece of work. Anyway, back to the podcast. And I really was scared in so many moments, and so many moments of the film I found utterly shocking and heartbreaking, to the point that I was completely broken by the end of this film, but also a little inspired by the very, very end of this film. But it got to the point where a couple of scenes from the end, I was almost in floods of tears. I was almost crying, and it's a film about a wrestling family, and I can't stress this enough. I don't care about wrestling at all. I really don't. I have zero interest in wrestling because it's all fake, isn't it? So I have zero interest in wrestling, and yet I'm watching this, and it's so powerful. It's really something special, and I really love the way it's directed by Sean Durkin. Sean Durkin is a filmmaker I'm not particularly familiar with, I must admit. But the way he directs the film is not what I expected at all. It's not flashy, it's not pulpy. And actually what he does in so many scenes in the film is just let the scenes play out with the actors. He will put the camera on the actors doing the scene, and there won't be any cuts. There might be some gradual camera movement, like there's one scene I can remember off the top of my head right now where the father in the Von Erich family is talking to his sons after a wrestling match which hasn't gone... Or did it go well? I can't actually remember now, but something in the wrestling match didn't go as planned, if I remember correctly, and he's talking to his sons, and you get this overhead camera, this aerial sort of camera shot, and it's just gradually zooming in on the characters. You wouldn't even know it's a zoom in if, you know, if you probably wouldn't even know it's a zoom in if you're not someone like me. That's the thing. I noticed things like that, and I was noticing the zoom in that scene, but at the same time, though, I was so caught up in the emotional stuff going on in that scene at the same time. You know, if you follow my thinking, I'm not sure how much I'm making sense there, but also there's another scene later on in the film where it's the family coming together for Christmas, and the scene is all one take, and it doesn't cut. At least it seems like it doesn't cut in the scene, and the camera just slowly and gradually tracks over to these characters as they're saying things in this scene. And I really love the way it was directed, because again, it's not flashy. I really felt that from the first trailer for this film, which had, you know, Tom Sawyer by Rush playing, I thought, oh, it's going to be quite a flashy and pulpy film. Or was it Tom Sawyer? There was a famous 80s song playing in the trailer. It might have been Don't Fear the Reaper. Both songs are featured in the film, by the way, and featured very well in, you know, reinforcing this period setting and reinforcing the songs which were important to the main characters. But anyway, yeah, there was a song played in the first trailer for this film, and that made me think that there's going to be quite a flashy movie. But actually, the direction of the film is subtle, and it isn't flashy, and it's really well directed with subtlety and with nuance, which works so well at making you focus, making the viewer, making me focus on these characters and the emotions and the story itself, which is so shocking and so heartbreaking. The way the narrative progresses and the storytelling is really, oh god, just thinking about it now, it makes me feel so sad, you know, because it is such a powerful film and so emotionally impactful, to the point that I really struggled to get up from my cinema seat. And I love films that make me do that. You know, All of Us Strange last week made me do that, and this film made me do that as well. Made me feel like that. You know, I felt like I couldn't even get out of my cinema seat because I was so emotionally taken back by this film. It's beautifully acted, beautifully directed, and beautifully written. So many poignant lines of dialogue, which, yeah, really hit the right notes emotionally. It's a very emotional film. If I was to have any criticisms, and I do have a couple of small ones, personally I would have liked to see would like there to be more of an explanation as to where the Von Erich family is at, how successful they are at the point that we meet them about 10 minutes into the movie, because the film opens in the 50s, if I remember correctly, and then it jumps in time to where you see the Von Erich brothers all grown up. And I would have liked there to be more of an explanation as to how successful the Von Erich brothers were at that point in the story. And I would have liked the wrestling scenes perhaps have, I mean, they felt real. I'm not saying they didn't feel real at all, but they didn't quite have the emotional weight that I would have liked them to, because, you know, Creed, I know Creed is not a wrestling film, I understand that it's a boxing movie, they're different sports, but I remember watching Creed for the first time. Yes, Creed, not any of the Rocky films, Creed I'm talking about, and I'm not a fan of boxing at all either. I have zero interest in boxing as well, But I remember watching that film for the first time, and there was this emotional weight behind so many of the boxing sequences that I was constantly engaged in them, and I didn't feel the same way with the wrestling sequences in this film. They didn't quite have the same narrative engagement and the same narrative thrust and the same emotional engagement as I perhaps wanted them to. And I do think the film leaves a bit to be desired, as the best films do, for sure, but at the same time, when the film ended, I was like, oh, I want to see more of the sort of aftermath after the events of a certain person's fate later on in the film. Trying not to go into too much detail in case people haven't seen this film yet, but I want to see more about the after effects of that. And then the film ends like 5 minutes later, and if you've seen the film, you're probably following my train of thought there. I'm not sure I've explained myself particularly well, but the point I'm making is the film leaves a bit to be desired, and I would have liked to have seen more of this story instead of where the film ended. Again, I'm not sure I've explained myself well, but I think the film leaves a bit to be desired, and I wasn't that emotionally engaged in the wrestling sequences either. That all being said, this film, though, it's a really powerful watch, and it is absolutely fantastic. And again, this is all coming from somebody who is not a wrestling fan, and someone who has zero interest in wrestling, and someone who didn't know the story of the Von X. I found this film fascinating. I couldn't believe this story was true. I don't know how much of the film is true in telling the story of the Von Erich family. I don't know how much of it is true and how much has been dramatized, but that didn't really bother me, because as a piece of cinema, it did far more than I expected it to do. It's very entertaining in parts, it's funny in parts, but it's also very emotionally impactful, to the point that I was almost in tears multiple times throughout this film. I mean, the film's portrayal of brotherly love is beautifully and masterfully done, and that is particularly the case in the performances, the directing and the writing. It's a very good movie. Very good. It's also tough to watch, but entertaining as well at times. And it's a really great movie that really caught me off guard, you know. Just thinking about it now and talking about it now has left me feeling speechless and a little lost for words. And so, all in all, I'm going to say that The Iron Claw, even though I have my criticisms with it, I'm going to say it's a 9 out of 10. You know, I really loved this film, and I am as surprised as anyone to say that. I'm really as surprised as anyone, because it's a wrestling film, and I have no interest in wrestling whatsoever, but I have interest in movies that make you feel a certain way, that really capture your heart and will break your heart, but also mend them at the same time. And that's what this film does. You know, it's a heartbreaking film, and I really want to emphasize that it's a tough watch, but I also think it's a rewarding watch, and I love the way it tells this story. I think Sean Durkin directed this film beautifully. Really well shot as well. And I fully believed in the period setting, and I loved how authentic it felt. Even so I don't know the story, it felt like I was watching people who understood how to tell this story, who wanted to tell this story in the best way possible. And the performances, Zac Efron is at his best here. You know, I really loved it. I really, really did. It's scary, it's heartbreaking, it's fascinating, and it's one of the most powerful films I've seen over the past couple of years. It's this beautiful portrayal of brotherly love, and that's what also makes it so heartbreaking at the same time, and such an emotional watch that left me floored at the same time. Yeah, I absolutely loved it. And so, all in all, as I've already said, and as I'm going to say once more in this podcast, I'm going to say that the Iron Claw is a 9 out of 10 from me. Anyway, guys, that's it for today's podcast. If you have seen The Iron Claw, please let me know your thoughts on it in the comment section below. Maybe you didn't think the film was particularly special, or maybe you think similar to me. Whatever your thoughts are on The Iron Claw, please let me know in the comment section below. And if you haven't yet, please do click down below and like and subscribe on this podcast. And look forward to many more podcasts coming very, very soon on this channel. As I've already said, thank you so much for watching or listening to this podcast, and I suppose this is it, so I will see you guys again soon, but bye for now, bye.